This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello and welcome to Daughterhood, the podcast. I am your host, Roseanne Corcoran, Daughterhood Circle Leader and primary caregiver. Daughterhood is the creation of Ann Tumlinson, who has worked on the front lines in the healthcare field for many years and has seen the multitude of challenges caregivers face. Our mission is to support and build confidence in women who are managing their parents' care. Daughterhood is what happens when we put our lives on hold to take care of our parents. We recognize this care is too much for one person to handle alone. We want to help you see your efforts are not only good enough, they are actually heroic. Our podcast goal is to bring you some insight into navigating the healthcare system, provide resources for you as a caregiver as well as for you as a person, and help you know that you don't have to endure this on your own. Join me in Daughterhood. Dr. DeLon Canterbury is the founder of Geriatrics and is helping to revolutionize the way we look at prescription medications by educating the public on deprescribing. Geriatrics is a telehealth medication management company that focuses on helping overwhelmed caregivers stop their loved ones from being over-medicated by using genetic drug screening, deprescribing, and health cost-saving strategies. They specialize in developing medication action plans for patients of all ages, but with a specialty in geriatric care. DeLon has been recognized as the deprescribing pharmacist, named one of the top 50 most influential pharmacists in the U.S., and most recently named one of Next Avenue and the American Society on Aging's Advocates for Aging 2024. In this episode, we discuss the importance of knowing the medications your care partners are taking, what he considers dangerous drugs, the most overprescribed drugs, and how to discuss deprescribing with your care partner's physician. I hope you enjoy our conversation. According to the nonpartisan think tank, the Lown Institute, more than 40% of older Americans regularly take 5 or more prescription drugs, and nearly 20% take 10 or more. When over-the-counter medicines and supplements are factored in, the share of older adults taking 5 or more pills, a practice known as polypharmacy, shoots up to 67%. DeLon, why should caregivers be concerned with those numbers?
Yeah, it's a stark reality because, well, we have an overprescribing issue in this country. We have a polypharmacy issue in this country, not just here, but across the world. Older adults tend to be the largest victim of medication side effects and errors, as their bodies simply don't process medications the same. So, with that, they have more risks of falls, more risks of cognitive impairment, more risk of drug-drug interactions, or even drug genetic interactions, which some tests can check for. So the higher your med list, we even have some studies coming out of Ireland showing how 85-year-old and up, the addition of each pill can actually increase mortality by about 3%. So there's an association of mortality increase with each additional medication added to a list. So we do have a problem, and our older adults are the largest consumers of prescriptions and over-the-counter medications within this country, period. So that's why I feel we have to change the narrative a bit and challenge the status quo by leveraging, your community pharmacists, or having open conversations with your prescribers about the necessity and lifetime benefit of needing to be on all these meds. Still, what worked 20 and 30 years ago may not be appropriate for you in your mid 60s and 70s. So we have to change that,
Yeah.
and that's what my mission is here to do.
Well, and you bring up a great point because how do you talk to your doctor about it? Because there are times when you could be seeing different doctors and none of them, as much as you go over your prescriptions with these doctors, they don't look at the interaction. So how do you bring up those conversations with the doctor?
Yeah, yeah, it's not too bad, I always coach my patients to see that they have all the power, like, we are just guides, you're the CEO of your health. So when you have that autonomy in mind, you can do what you want, let's be honest. But ultimately, have an open conversation. Simply ask, hey, doc, I'm interested in getting off some of my meds. What are one or two medications we can consider having a drug holiday or stopping? Or do you see that there's a lifetime benefit? And, if they're not even at least willing to have a conversation, then you may need a new doctor.
Yeah.
You want people who are able to listen and make sure you feel heard and respect your wishes. And it's not always, well, I'm the neurologist, so you need to be on all these neuromeds, or I'm the cardiovascular person, so you have to be on all this. And because it's truthfully, no, we don't have evidence, especially for older adults, that all of these meds are completely vital and important for their person's quality of life. So just having a regular discussion about prescriptions, and one opportunity you can do this is with your annual wellness visit. People who have Medicare, there's an annual wellness visit your clinicians can screen for, where they're doing mental health checks, food security, etc., social determinants. But that's the prime opportunity to have a full comprehensive review with about the medications with your doctor. And that's the perfect time to have a de-prescribing conversation, just asking, about what can we do to safely decrease the dose, or withdraw some medications that I just don't need anymore.
Right.
So making that a regular point of conversation is crucial. And then also too, what are you doing to implement lifestyle changes or dietary changes to advocate for de-prescribing, right? We have to substitute something with another. So are you taking that active lifestyle? Are you, avoiding those cheese eggs, which I love the most? Like, what are we doing to incorporate some healthy habits so you don't have to be on 4 or 5 different blood pressures? Because a lot of this stuff can be reversed.
Well, yeah, and that's the hard part because you just can't stop.
Mhm.
You have to there has to be a net of some sort, and how do you go about when they say, "Well, you can just stop that." And you're like, I know you can't just stop that. You can just stop, like, today, it's fine." How do you go about then backing off of it?
There are studies that tell us that 92% of patients are willing to go ahead with de-prescribing recommendations
Mhm.
once the doctor says so. So once they say, hey, you don't need these, most patients are pretty cool with it. And I completely respect the, patient's psychological attachment or
Right.
autonomy that may feel they're being challenged. We have to kind of reorient them to what the appropriateness of this may be now versus when you first had it on board. So yeah, yeah, I've had absolutely some patients who don't want to get off, or it's just a part of their routine. So you have to again educate around that. You're not here to force people to do anything, but ultimately, doctors have a lot of power in having positive outcomes when it comes to having a deep prescribing conversation, and
Mhm.
even better when patients are coming and bringing this up as a point of concern, or maybe having some side effects, or I'm having issues. So really being in tune with some of the physical changes you may experience as a patient or caregiver. You guys see them day in, day
Right.
out. So
Yep.
you see those changes, when something's off. So being very keen to that is critical when you're bringing that up to the doctor's office, and conveying the urgency to potentially switch a remedy.
Right, right. Well, because it's more than just giving the medicine. It's more than just saying, "Here, mom, here's your pills." We have a front row seat of this. Are there pills that you can just stop, or are there pills that you have to like take it half of this for 3 days, and then take a quarter of it for 3 days? Like, are most of them? How do they fall? I guess it depends on the type.
Yeah, it depends on the medication
Yeah.
and the type, and how long you've been on it. So it's a number of factors. You see, it's very it's quite variable, the response people may have. And of
Hmm.
course, there's certain medications you just can't stop cold turkey, right? So
Right.
some antipsychotics, some benzodiazepines like your Xanax or alprazolam, um, even certain blood pressure medications you don't want to just stop. So that's why it's important to leverage your concierge pharmacist. Pharmacists, especially ones that are geriatric trained, know the ins and out of how to come up with those tapers.
Hmm.
I mean, I've had some horror stories of people in transition of care just cold turkeying their benzos, which is ridiculous, and
Yeah.
precipitating withdrawals under care. I'm like, that ain't right. So we definitely don't want to do that. So, deprescribing again, it's a supervised, safe removal of medications. And it could be a dose reduction, it could be a switch or alternate therapy, it could be combining three into one, but it's ultimately doing what we can to reduce the pill burden for our clients and for our caregivers. So ultimately, yeah, you want to absolutely have a conversation. Even if you're thinking about it, bring it up with your provider. Like, don't see it as a challenge. See it as, hey, just this is where I'm maybe having some issues or need some support. Can we try something else? And
Mhm.
there are usually other options out there.
What do you see are the most common overprescribed drugs or drugs that people are on for years and years, but may not necessarily need to be on them?
So, as we age, it's like you're a car, right? An antique car. And some things just kind of break down with time. And so a lot of the chronic conditions that we see are what most older adults have, right? The usual, the high blood pressure, the diabetes, maybe some high cholesterol. And in some instances, dementia medications and whatnot. So honestly, it's everyone. I've seen aspirin overprescribed. I've seen Tylenol overused. It can be difficult to pinpoint all of them, but there are some main ones that I challenge more of our clinicians and some of our caregivers who may be adept at navigating resources. But there is a list called the Beers list, which is essentially a list of high risk medications that we tend to want to avoid in people over 65 and up, and then explain, based on the medication class, why it may be inappropriate. Um, in my like direct line of work, I mean, I've seen a huge overuse of supplements and vitamins, which I'm not against at all. But if you're being told it's gonna cure your memory loss or something ridiculous, then don't waste your money and time. But yeah, we tend to believe natural supplements and herbals are completely safe, and they are absolutely not. They are absolutely not. Now, for the most part, sure, you may be okay. But if you're not considering how it may interact with your prescriptions or other medications or even other supplements, they can pose harm. And I've seen them put people in ERs, right? I've had a
Hmm.
patient who was taking a really raw form of cinnamon, right? And was wondering why she was having so much heartburn, and she had had heartburn for like years where now she's failing omeprazole, she's failing Zantac, she's failing pantoprazole, like she's failing pretty expensive prescription meds and now has to use the strongest one, still failed it, right? And it was because she was using the supplement for all these years and no provider took the time to see, oh, this is the issue. So she wasted a lot of money. It was like a $90 copay at one point for that 1 month supply and still failed. So it's like how much time was wasted, how much energy was wasted if you didn't have a comprehensive review of your meds. So that's why I say ask your independent pharmacist if you can. If you got a local mom and pop pharmacy, just go in, support them. They tend to focus more on patient care versus kind of the pill mill design of a lot of our retail pharmacies. However, we've got amazing, brilliant pharmacists in the community settings too. It's just a little hard to do all those things because I've been there.
Well, yeah, because yeah, it's gotten really hard to have these conversations with a pharmacist because they're so overworked.
Very, very. It's a tough climate for sure. And there's a reason why I left that world from being a retail pharmacy manager and pushing the numbers to creating geriatrics or telehealth deprescribing companies. So that way you have your own access to a pharmacist without any brick and mortar, without lines, without insurance holding you up. It's all just access to intellect and advocacy and having someone to really navigate those meds because it's hard. It's how do we expect people to just be thrown into caregiving and now you have to manage and administer and understand medication management and the drug interactions and when to dose it and if you can crush it or not. Like it's very difficult. Like we barely know that. Like we have to still look something up, right? So
Right.
let's give some people some grace here and give people the I call it an unhinged pharmacist, like a just concierge, but just we're not hindered by the system, and we have so much more to offer than just dispensing. So that's been one of the driving, I guess, forces behind this deprescribing movement is I think we need to redefine aging to require deprescribing in every conversation, period.
Absolutely agree with you. And your passion and your heart, it really came from your own experience, which I find a lot of caregiver advocates, that's what, that's where it originates. And can you tell me a little bit about how you got here?
Of course. So, my grandmother had some mild dementia while I was finishing up undergrad and applying for pharmacy school. And we unfortunately had to move her from her facility in Brooklyn down to our family home in Atlanta, where I grew up. And it was because they could no longer take care of her because her behavioral symptoms were out of whack. Lo and behold, 4 or 5 months later of us witnessing our grandmother decline, sundown, become more irritable, hiding things, losing things, becoming paranoid. Um, we upon a refill discovered that she was taking a medication, which was an antipsychotic. It was ziprasidone,
Mhm.
and it was being used inappropriately to manage her behavioral symptoms of dementia. Now, it was my mom who advocated or really complained about the decline she's had, and the pharmacist took that information. And this was in a community setting at a Rite Aid in Atlanta, and she took the time to listen and advocate and call the provider up and convey some of the issues we've been having. And so, in doing that, the pharmacist got the medication deprescribed and withdrawn over a couple of weeks.
Mhm.
So that caused, honestly, a momentous shift in my grandma's health. She got much better. She got clarity, so much so that we were able to put her back into a different facility in New York and let her live into the beautiful age of 90 years old. So she actually passed my last day of pharmacy school a little bit shortly after her 90th birthday. But she was happy. She was cracking jokes. She remembered us. She was there, and this was from the use of a medication which has what's called an FDA black box warning, which is the most severe warning you can have on any prescription. But it does state that the use of this medication can increase the risk of cardiovascular death or mortality in older adults or in people who have dementia.
Right.
So it's like, why are we paying and allowing this provider to write an inappropriate prescription? And yes, they're between a rock and a hard place. At the time, they didn't have some of these newer agents for like 3 decades. There was only 5 drugs you could choose from or so for dementia. So I understand it being difficult, but if my mom didn't say anything, then I don't think my grandmother would have lived to see 90. And that tells me as a pharmacist that one, we don't do enough to advocate for older adults. Two, we don't do enough to advocate for the caregiver. Three, the system wins when you're on more meds. And that's what it's always been. And at that point in my life, I was going into community pharmacy and thankful to that pharmacist again. Shout out for taking the energy to advocate for us in a way that I didn't know would impact my trajectory in getting into geriatric medicine and getting board certified. But that taught me, especially in working in the community as a Walgreens pharmacist and being in the same boat, and then seeing the inundation of medication errors in particularly older adults, especially in rural communities. It was even more alarming to see that. So I got a bit depressed and angry with the health system and said, you know what, let's just try something different and not make have every grandma on 20 meds, and that was the mission behind geriatrics. So in 2019, 2020, I stepped down from that world of retail and said, let's start this and help people directly, and it's been a roller coaster ever since.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic because it's so hard because the doctors are telling you these things, especially when it comes to antipsychotics and dementia. And you're a dementia caregiver, you're at the end of your rope.
Mm,
And here is this professional that's saying, no, no, you can, I know what it says, but it's just a little bit and it will help. And you're in this, you are between a rock and a hard place. And it's hard because you're trying to get the answer from this person who's doing the prescribing and is the doctor. And you're just
yeah.
kind of floating in the breeze.
Yeah, it's tough, and especially with in the world of dementia, we just have to stop treating it as something you have to treat with medications. It's not as cut and dry as that. Frankly, we just don't have the best medications for it. So when we start adopting more of these, dementia-friendly conversation or redirection or just other ways of treating this disease, and seeing it as people with brain changes and understanding what that means in medicine, from a clinician standpoint. That's the problem is we think we can just treat everything with a pill. And in some instances, sure, we can, but dementia is not one of those cookie cutter things, and that's why I'm really grinds my gears to see these antipsychotics and inappropriate meds just being piled on, and they tend to have a lot of polypharmacy when you're dealing with patients living with dementia. So
Right.
and so that's why it's important for caregivers to really not take no for an answer, and like if you're questioning or concerned about something, use your voice, let it be known, like raise it, and don't just sit back and let it happen, especially if you're seeing decline or things worsen in your loved one.
It's that thing too when you talk to the doctor and they say, "Oh, I've never had anybody complain about that," or "That shouldn't cause a problem." And then you're left with the, "Yeah, but it is." And I think you just like you said, you just keep reiterating that, or you don't leave the office until they address it. Like what do you do in those instances?
Um, if it's possible, try to see another provider.
Okay.
If it's not possible, um, get a second opinion, and that could be, your community pharmacist. That could be, working with us. That could be having a third party just do a little audit of what's going on. But I'd say again, having a pharmacist help you advocate is where we come in, is we work with you so that way if you're hey if you feel like you don't understand what to say, like that's what we do as a concierge geriatric pharmacist. So we're meant to be your advocate within that waiting room, and we're discussing, here are the harms that can happen. And so a lot of this really again is one of the things I like to empower people is to say, hey, look, is this absolutely life sustaining? All right, and if it's not absolutely life sustaining or it's not important for the quality of life, then you may not need the medicine. And so that's where you are simply having an open conversation about, hey, what can we do to stop this time? And you just make that a regular cadence. What can we do to get off one or two things until you're on as little medications as possible?
Because every medication has a side effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the difference in a generic versus the name brand?
Yeah. So the brand name is usually what comes out of a drug first, and it's the proprietary, formulation of a drug product. So brand names, there is an active ingredient that does all the work. And so what generics are allowed to do is to have just 80% or minimum of what the brand name is in terms of their active ingredient. Now, you could still get the same therapeutic effect, so no problem between brand and generic. I don't generally say there's much of a difference. There are minute differences like how it's made, the recipe, the fillers, the formulation, the dyes that are in it. There's some, things in there like that nature, but ultimately you're getting the same drug. So we tend to, push more for generics now. Some medications wouldn't be the same. Like there are some medications like your thyroid medications or like tacrolimus or warfarin. There's certain meds where you can't just switch the brand name with the generic name because of how they're made, and they're what are called narrow therapeutic index drugs, meaning they have a very, very small window of benefit versus harm. So when you're in that sweet spot, there's no issues, but if you're outside of it, it can cause issues. So with those meds, you want to keep people on the same manufacturer. All right.
Yep.
Um, so in a nutshell, those are the rare occurrences where like brand and generics are not the same. But for most people, brand generics, generally generics are going to be just as fine, if not cheaper, for what you're trying to manage.
Okay. It's hard too with Medicare sometimes because they're only going to pay for the generic. And if you are taking one of those narrow therapeutics, depending on the generic company that they're buying from that month, it's going to be different.
Can be. You can always just have your doctor write that it's medically necessary for you to have the brand name. Um, doesn't mean your prices may go down. You could, and that's what's called a prior auth. So they could write that and see if that goes through. Sometimes that's okay, especially if you have to have it. Some insurances will challenge that and want to see you fail their generic first. So,
Right.
you know, that's insurance.
It's insurance. Yeah, it always comes back to insurance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does.
And I think also women's reactions to medications that haven't really been studied. It almost feels like it's an afterthought at times because
Mhm.
everything's studied on men. They're not studied on women. So when
Right.
we go in and say this is what's happening, it's like, oh no, that's not what we have.
Yeah. No, that's a real issue. And our women actually just being female is a risk factor for having more polypharmacy or higher inappropriate medication use. Um, and yeah, historically, yeah, man, our data, we were generally looking at 40-year-old white males, and we're extrapolating what worked for them to older populations, and then let alone every male. So
Right.
not applicable to females. And so there are medications that are dosed differently based on gender. And women just have different biochemistry, right? So there's
Yeah.
different hormones. There's also different responses in fat and how much we have fat stores. So the fat can affect the way a medication can work, right? So that's
Mhm.
why certain meds you want to be a little with the underdose a little bit, so to speak. So, but yeah, we have a huge problem with not including the best data for all people, right? People of color, people, of course, genders, orientation, etc. We don't have clean data for that. So we've just kind of extrapolate from older data. And that's really why we're in the situation we're in with polypharmacy and more older adults taking all these meds without having someone really combing through all of them. So that's what I love doing, enjoy doing. It's because I'm working for the family, not for anyone else.
Right. What do you consider the most dangerous drugs that people are on regularly?
Um, there a lot of them are. I'm gonna be honest, man. Like it'd be the most unsuspecting drug that can cause issues. I've seen Benadryl used so many times to sleep, yet inappropriately in older adults, and I've seen it. worsen dementia cases and flares and whatnot, and didn't realize it. I mean, so in my world, of course, there are like obvious no-nos, like high risk medications that worsen falls pretty bad. So like your lorazepam, your benzos, diazepines, Xanax, alprazolam, those anxiety meds that are used inappropriately for sleep. Those are a big one. Chronic opioid use, hydrocodone, tramadol, norco, oxycodone. We don't want you on that because of the falls risk and over sedation and dizziness and urinary or water retention in some instances.
Hmm.
Mainly the combination of those two, benzos and opioids, can increase falls and, of course, cause overdose, especially if you combine them with alcohol. So those are kind of the bigger ones, but um, I don't like ibuprofen, like NSAIDs. Those are really harmful with long-term use. Again, all these have caveats, right? But for the most part, if I see long-term like ibuprofen, diclofenac, Aleve. They have a lot of drug interactions with blood thinners, and they can cause stomach bleeds. They have increased stroke risk. Yeah. So there's a lot of meds. So that's why I'm like, it's important to know all your meds and have an up-to-date list of all the herbals and over-the-counter, all the supplements, because I've seen benign diabetic drugs cause UTIs and urinary incontinence, and it was just because the diabetes med acted like a diuretic and caused them to urinate. And it was just the way the drug worked. It wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just what happened. So just having that little tweak has now saved the caregiver a crap ton of money on depends, the risks of him getting up in the middle of the night and potentially falling in the bathroom mitigated because we switched that urgency of him having to urinate. Yeah. And and his stuff is still controlled, his diabetes. So having that pharmacist lens is going to help you, but there are a lot. Another one I don't like are proton pump inhibitors. So those are your acid reflux medicines, like your omeprazole, or mainly that's the main one people see: omeprazole, pantoprazole. Those are meant to block acids, but they have been associated with fractures. They're associated with dementia with long-term use, also pneumonia infections, and also I don't like insulins and blood thinners. Those are some of the ones most associated with sending you to the ER. So usually blood thinning. So there's a lot of meds. A lot of meds have their risks.
Hmm.
Even your antidepressant has a significant falls risk. People don't know that.
No, they don't.
So just the use of antidepressants can cause a fall, or at least increase it by, I don't know, 60% or so. So the goal is just get off as many meds as you can safely, with your doctor's supervision or with our help. Of course,
Yeah.
we're happy to do that. But anything can pose a risk. That's why I really stress an up to date med list and really assessing if it's appropriate for you for the rest of your life.
Wow. So I guess when you talk to your doctor, like, what is this for? What's the benefit of continuing? Can I lower the dose? Can I get off of the dose? That type of thing.
Definitely.
Wow.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does that look like if somebody calls you and says, I just want to go over this medication list? What does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. So we do telehealth concierge services, and you're able to sign up. Just give us an idea of all your health conditions, all of your medications, and what are your goals of therapy. And for an hour and a half, we will do a deep dive with you, and we're going to go through everything and look at everything and basically do a full tune up on your body and just make sure that these things are not causing any potential harm. So this includes side effect management. If you already have some issues about some things, we're going to kind of match the drug that's most associated with the side effect. So that way you have a game plan going to the doctor's office and what we could potentially stop first. Uh, we're also assessing for the dose appropriateness. So is this dose absolutely necessary, right? Do you need to be on this forever. So we're to make sure the dose is appropriate for you. There's also a component where we're checking for your genetics. So we're looking at your body. And so we can look and see how your body would respond to certain medications without you having to take a single pill. So there's a new world called pharmacogenomics, a study of your genes and meds. And so we can predict how your body may respond to a medicine just by a simple cheek swab. So that's also a part of our services is explaining what, hey, I mean, you have a rare hypersensitivity, you should avoid this, or you can't clear statins very well, that's why you're having muscle pains. You should switch to another. We're able to get some clarity for that, and then additionally, the fun part is we advocate with you. So we're not only giving you a cheat sheet of how to do all this, but we're gonna, for people who sign up for our services, we advocate with your doctor. We're faxing the report to them. We're calling and discussing the issues we may have found. So that way you just have your own advocate again at the ready for any issues that may come up. So people leave with a lot of clarity. They leave with a lot of confidence. They have a deeper understanding of the necessity of their meds and the purpose of what they're doing.
Hmm.
Most people don't know what they're doing and why they're taking all these meds or even what half the conditions they have really mean. So I think explaining that and taking the time to get into that gives that that ability to see how they can make changes themselves is that empowerment piece that I think we undervalued. So yeah, you can not only get that, you also have a professional who can essentially provide you with prescribing opportunities and touch points. So you have a game plan. So I mean, that's the really big goal is advocating for less meds. Maybe our first patient, 36 medications. We were able to get her down to 8 medications in just 2 months, all from one review, right? And working
Oh
with the
my,
doctor to make it happen. So
but
that's what we do.
36 medications. Seriously, a doctor is in a room with a patient and they're on 36 medications and nobody thinks that's a lot. How does that happen?
Uh, it's a lot of reasons why it happens. It's a systemic issue.
Yeah.
It's hard to put it all on the doctor, but this woman had maybe 5 different specialists, like
Mhm.
neurologist, cardiologist, primary care, endocrine. There's all these other doctors, and so one of the main problems I find are most doctors aren't communicating with each other on the medication plan, or they don't think of how their drug may interact with a drug for another disease state.
Right.
That happens all too often. And so that's the problem is we don't generally embed a pharmacist prior to prescribing something. We do it reactively. We write something and hope the pharmacy catches it, or the patient tells us it's not that bad of a side effect, and we change it later. So it's all done reactively, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, so that's one of the beauty of our services is we're kind of don't care who all the doctors are, and we look at everything holistically and create this plan that's personalized to what you want, the caregiver and the patient.
Yeah.
And it takes a team. You don't. That's one thing I also coach is you don't have to be a clinician to make this happen. That's why I'm like, we know how much unpaid caregivers are saving our healthcare system, and we know that the numbers are only growing. And if you're not a caregiver, you will be one tomorrow. Like it's only growing. So knowing that we're having mad people get turned 65 every day, we're going to require caregivers. I promise you, our system is not equipped to catch this. So it is going to fall on a caregiver to ask the right questions. And if you're not asking those questions, you're missing opportunities to not only save yourself headache, but keep your loved one around longer. That's really the goal of this. So you got to ask those questions.
Yes. Yep. Well, Delon, such great info here. Thank you. Do you have any final thoughts on what you would say to a caregiver regarding the importance of deprescribing?
So I do a good bit of public speaking, and I meet amazing people across the country at caregiver conferences, caregiver coaching conferences, workshops. The story is the same. Their loved ones got so much better the minute they started getting them off all of those meds. And it's like, I get it so much, it's almost, it's almost sad because it's like, damn, where were you, DeLon, when my dad was dealing with this 5 years ago? Where were you? Why didn't this exist? Like, I get it, and it's painful because there are many of people I work with still who've lost someone to polypharmacy or they suspected it. So if you have that inkling, or if you never thought about it and you see your loved one that may be on more than 7 or 10 medicines, then ask for a review. Just demand a comprehensive review, not a checklist, not a, are you still on this? Yes or no? Like, literally go through each thing and get an understanding of this. Because promise you, there's one or two things you probably don't need. And there are probably one or two things that are causing issues that you didn't even think was an issue until you realize someone was able to clinically tell you. And so the less meds, the better. When you're hitting 60 to 80, people have all these chronic conditions. I'm not saying all meds are bad, not at all. But as a caregiver, this is one of the, this is the last touch point of treatment a patient gets. It's the pill. So you want to make damn sure if you're going to force someone to take it, it's what you really need now, not what you needed 30 years ago. So I encourage you to challenge the system. Don't take no for an answer. Have a polite, open conversation on, hey, doc, we want to get her off of these meds. We know polypharmacy is real. There are harms associated with it. We want to reduce harms. Does she really need all 4 blood pressure meds? Can we try one or two and see if she's still in range? Can we, same concept for diabetes? Her sugars controlled with one or two things. Do we need 3 or 4? Probably not. And then again, being very in tune with people's bodies and how they may respond. If you see any side effects, don't brush it off as she's just getting old. That's ageist. That's a problem. You know, Communicate what you're seeing and what you're feeling and hearing and witnessing with your loved ones. So push back. That's all I can say. And no, it's not the doctor's fault. They're doing what unfortunately our system wants them to do. And some are holistic. Some have this mindset of a geriatrician. So I always encourage, if you can find a geriatrician, shoot for one. They tend to have this ethos of deprescribing in their nature. The problem is, you know, that's not everywhere.
Right.
We're not going to see that everywhere. And some are progressive, some are like that. But
Right.
frankly, it's not enough if I'm still in business. So
Yeah.
that's my take home message is first think it's the meds. In the world of pharmacy, if you see an issue, assume there's a medicine that's causing it. And until you rule out otherwise, at that point, just talk to your pharmacist, talk to your provider.
A big thank you to Dr. DeLon Canterbury for being my guest today. For more information and to contact DeLon, visit his website, geriatrics, geriatrx.org. I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. Head over to daughterhood.org and click on the podcast section for show notes, including the full transcript and links to any resources and information from today's episode. You can find and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. We are also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Daughterhood the Podcast. Feel free to leave me a message and let me know what issues you may be facing and would like to hear more about. Or even if you just want to say hi, I'd love to hear from you. Also, a very special thank you to Susan Rowe for our theme music, the instrumental version of her beautiful song Mama's Eyes from her album Lessons in Love. I hope you found what you were looking for today: information, inspiration, or even just a little company. This is Roseanne Corcoran. I hope you'll join me next time in Daughterhood.